A very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers and those listening on Second Advent Radio. We're delighted to be with you another Sabbath afternoon for Let's Talk. We're always happy to come your way. Today being the 11th day of December is a special Sabbath. Special because today is my anniversary. My wife and I celebrate 27 years of marriage today, and she is in the background. She takes care of the behind the scenes issues and Let's Talk. She makes sure I get the questions that you ask. She filters them, sends them to me, etc. And I just want to just let my wife know that we do appreciate her hard work, but more so for the 27 years of marriage. She has been my faithful partner, and I suppose you may know that I would not be here had it not been for her support and her encouragement. So my darling Michelle, thank you for putting up with the challenges of being married to Carson Greene for 27 years. Well, let's get into the business, because we're not here to talk about marriage. We're here to talk about something related, though. We are talking this afternoon about pregnancy. Now, that's quite a subject. So here's what I'm going to say. If you're listening and you have a teenage daughter, maybe you need to call them up, say, hey, tune in, because Let's Talk is on, and we're talking about pregnancy, something that you want your daughters to hear, your sons too. The other day when I announced this subject and said all the women need to be listening, some of the folks commented, the men need to be listening likewise. So we're talking about pregnancy and its impact on female health. And we have a special guest with us this afternoon. But before we introduce our special guest, we like to invite you to have a word of prayer with us. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the privilege of sharing on Let's Talk today. We ask for your wisdom and your guidance. We pray that you will be with all of our viewers on our YouTube channels, SLC Church channel and SLC Adventist, and for those joining us on Facebook likewise, and then for our listeners on Second Advent Radio. We pray that our discourse today will prove meaningful, and in a very special way, be with our guest and grant that as she articulates that the information will prove meaningful. Thank you for hearing and answering. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, we have somebody who is not entirely new to Let's Talk. You may remember the one Sabbath when I was not hosting Let's Talk. There was a discussion on, I believe it was breast cancer, and one of our participants is back with us to talk about this whole issue of pregnancy. We are so delighted this afternoon to have with us Dr. Avenel Henry. I want to just let you know that Dr. Henry is a Caribbean, you may say Caribbean lady. She really was born in Guyana on the South American continent. And Trinidad is her second home, so to speak. She did her undergraduate studies at USC, the University of the Southern Caribbean. So at least we have something in common. I studied my undergraduates at CUC, it was called back then. And she did her graduate studies at Loma Linda University School of Medicine and is currently in her third year of OBGYN residency at Montefort Hospital. We are delighted to have you with us, Dr. Henry. Welcome to Let's Talk this afternoon.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I had a great time when we all discussed breast cancer, so I'm excited to be back.
All right. And I know that we have lots of regular viewers out of Trinidad and Tobago. Your father is one of our very regular visitor, and I want to think that your mother is also watching. So let me say to Pastor Henry and Sister Henry, a special good afternoon. I must also say good afternoon to Dr. Tobias. Dr. Tobias is perhaps one of our most ardent listeners, viewers on Let's Talk. Well, Dr. Henry, we want to jump right into this issue of the matter of pregnancy. But let me first ask you, You specialize in some persons who are not quite familiar with the terminologies of medicine might wonder what in the world is OBGYN. So upfront, tell us what is OBGYN.
So OBGYN is an acronym. It stands for obstetrics and gynecology. And essentially, it's a subspecialty of medicine that deals with kind of all things women's health. The OB part, the obstetrics, that talks about pregnancy, prenatal care, and prenatal refers to the period before you deliver, when you're pregnant, and then postpartum care, which is talks about the period after you're pregnant and kind of all things related to pregnancy. So that's the OB part. And gynecology is kind of a larger issue, larger subspecialty of women's health that deals with any other issues of those organs that are your reproductive organs and special to women only. And it deals with any type of complaint or any type of pathology or disease or like things like cancer, things like fibroids, all of those things that kind of plague women. So that's the gynecology part. So the specialty is those two things together.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for explaining that. Obstetrics and gynecology. So all related to the issue of pregnancy. So I believe most ladies would understand those terms, but we do have a lot of men who listen on Let's Talk. So in the event that there was a male or two who didn't quite understand the terminology, now you get it. Just I wonder what motivated you for going into this field of study. A lot of people would say, you know, childbirth and pregnancy and that kind of thing. Why would I want to do that? What was your motivation?
It's actually very funny because as you're asking me, like saying what was my motivation, I'm remembering yesterday when there was like a very, very exciting delivery on the labor floor, and I was completely soaked in a lot of fluids that people would probably think would be a reason to leave the job. But in terms of my interest in the field, I think I have a lot of women in my life over the years that are very passionate about women's health, very passionate about total kind of whole person care of the woman. And I sort of grew up in that environment. And it wasn't really until I was in med school, probably around my third year, that I was thinking about it as a subspecialty or to pursue after medicine, after med school graduation. And so some of the things that attracted me to the field were that you have such a great potential of influencing someone at so many different times in their life. So pregnancy is an incredibly special time, and we'll talk more about that. And it's just so exciting and such a privilege to meet all these different types of women and to help them kind of begin their family structure and deal with different very, very vulnerable times like loss or joy or sadness or pain. And then to me, the things I do are exciting. It's a good combination of kind of what people think of sit-down medicine, like come to clinic, see your doctor, and then also being able to do surgeries that are interesting and learn different types of anatomy that are interesting. So the field seemed like a good combination of all of the things that I cared about. And God, in his word, he talks so much about women, and he identifies such strongly with women, and he calls himself so many attributes of women that I really feel like he can do a lot with my life in this specialty.
Oh, wonderful. Interesting. That's very interesting. I want to now ask you, because we're talking about pregnancy, and in your response just now, you indicated that, you know, one of the things that kind of motivated you is the whole issue of women's issues and being able to impact other women. For the men who are listening to us today, should they turn off their computers, turn off their phones and say, oh, that's a woman's topic, I don't want to hear? Why is this subject that we're discussing this afternoon important to men?
So first of all, it's important from many different directions. So Firstly, I'd like to remind everyone or any men that are interested here that they, came from pregnancy. That is how they joined us. So their mothers went through all of the things that we're going to talk about. So just by way of information, they're not separate from this talk. But in terms of the actual processes of pregnancy, birth, postpartum care, and women's health, if there are women in your life that are interested or experiencing or going through these different phenomenon, the men in their life have a very special role to play in helping them to navigate and to kind of back off from complications and to avoid a lot of really adverse outcomes. And so I think it is important to arm yourself with knowledge, one, to be a good support person to the women in your life, and to aid your general health and understanding. And as you navigate your life as a man who interacts with women, be it in the workplace, be it in social settings, in different responsibilities that you have, being oblivious to women's health, it's dangerous and it's also embarrassing because you can end up in situations that you really put your foot in your mouth or you don't really know how to navigate just because you don't understand. So I think it's very important to arm ourselves with information so that we can be kind of productive members of society, because this is an issue that affects all of society.
I mean, very true. Sometimes, of course, I, as a pastor, as a counselor, in terms of marriage preparation, I do a lot of work in the area of family life, and sometimes I'm counseling a couple for marriage. And when we deal with the human anatomy, because you're going to get married, you do need to understand some important elements, some important features of the reproductive system. And when I ask questions, for example, when I ask the men, when can a woman get pregnant? I say, if she has her period on such and such a date, when in the month can she get pregnant? And lots of them scratch their head and they say, well, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So the matter of knowledge is important.
Yeah.
And I think also, this whole idea of interest and partnership, so when your spouse knows that you are interested in the things that affect them, that impact them, and you're showing that kind of interest, it helps to create a kind of bond. It says you care, and so that's so very important.
Yeah. Well, when we don't have knowledge in certain areas, it makes a wall between us and really being able to engage in that area and to advocate for ourselves and the women in your life. And just like you're saying, in any social setting, even if you're not currently thinking about marriage, or if you're not currently planning your family as a man, I'm sure there are women you interact with, and trust me, they know that you don't know what you're saying when you talk to them. So this is to help you to not be that person.
So, gentlemen, I hope you're listening, and I hope you're taking notes. It is important. Some of you have been married for a very long time, and I suppose by association you have learned along the way. But you have an opportunity to influence your sons. And for those of you who are not yet married or planning to get married, listen up. Useful information for you. Well, Dr. Henry, we want to move on to dealing with the substantive issue that we came to talk about, pregnancy. Now, after God created Adam and Eve, he blessed them and instructed them to be fruitful and multiply. That instruction, be fruitful and multiply, suggests that God was saying to them, go get pregnant, go have children. Can you talk us through some of the dynamics of pregnancy? What changes does the body go through to facilitate the development of a baby?
Yeah. Wow. So this is something that we can talk about for hours. We can do an entire course on all of the wonderful, creative marvels that happen in the body. And there's honestly so much that we're still trying to understand. But just before I say that, I just want to say, in terms of to any women listening who, could kind of be triggered by talks about pregnancy or who have gone through significant trauma, I just want you to know that womanhood is not defined by pregnancy. It's not defined by motherhood. And so if as we're talking, just check in with yourself. If you feel like you need to take a minute to step away, that's, completely fine. God made womanhood and he made pregnancy, but he's also a God that understands all of the really horrible things that sin has done. So that's just a general disclaimer. Anyway, for pregnancy itself, I like to think of it as your body trying to accommodate a separate body. And so essentially everything in the body is supposed to be set up to fight things that are foreign or that are different. And I think in the time of COVID, we've all heard a lot about your immune system and all of the different cells. And I think a lot of us are like Facebook scientists at this point. But your body changes, your body, like your cardiovascular system, which is your heart, your blood vessels, and all of the things that send your blood around, your liver, your kidneys. These essentially, they kind of expand in their capacity. So they all change in terms of their functionality, how much blood it's pumping to your body, your blood on a cellular level. There's a lot of things that influence, and I guess we'll get into in terms of complications later on, but you become at different risk for kind of like blood clots and these sorts of things, because your whole body is essentially trying to not fight this new life that's inside. Your nutrition is being kind of split between you and this new life that all of the cells are making. And think every woman can attest, who has been pregnant, can attest to the different things that it does in terms of psychologically and emotionally and those kind of burdens. But if you think of it, you think of a small group of cells that kind of get implanted in this organ called your uterus, which is an organ that's in your pelvis. And then it begins to grow and to multiply and to create kind of a little perfect nutritional world within your body to accommodate new life.
So you have said quite a mouthful there. And what I picked up there is that this cell or group of cells over time that begin to multiply and develop, is given priority by the body, because it's an important process.
Yeah.
And so it is taking nutrients from the body. It is forcing certain hormonal changes in the body, etc., and the body has to respond. So this you made reference to in your response, but I want to ask you more directly. So in terms of pregnancy, the development of the baby, your body is making adjustments. It is prioritizing the development of the baby. In terms of, is this a strain on the body? What are the implications for the lady? Now, for example, let's say a lady did not intend to get pregnant. There are some persons who plan pregnancy, and maybe we can talk about that another time. Some persons who plan pregnancy, and there are many others who didn't plan pregnancy. So for an individual who, let's say, is listening and decides, I want to get a baby, what are some of the things they must bear in mind? You went through a lot of things just now. So in terms of, okay, I need to prepare for this. What are some of the things they should be considering?
So some of the things I would say first off the bat, and this is what I kind of tell my patients, that if you're planning pregnancy, which is the absolute best thing when you plan it and it's really something that you decide and you go forward with, think about getting your own self in optimum health. So as we all know, Seventh-day Adventists, we're all very well aware of the relationship between your mind and your body and how optimum health really influences your whole life. And pregnancy is no different. So to a woman who is listening who says, maybe I, could be thinking about pregnancy, I would say, first of all, look at yourself and think about your own sort of health status in terms of your weight, your nutrition, your activity, the things that you take in, not only like physical diet, but in terms of different types of activities and interactions and so on, and to kind of streamline those things as much as possible to set yourself up for success. In terms of things that you should keep in mind, pregnancy, even though it is not a disability, I don't want you to think that every pregnant woman is, just falling down and needs to just be at home on the bed, locked away, and they can't do anything, they can't move. pregnancy is a high risk time in life. And it has a lot of implications, not only for those 9 months, but for the rest of your life. And there's a lot of those changes that we were talking about in terms of what all the different cells are doing and how your vital organs kind of adjust to accommodate the pregnancy. A lot of these have long-term effects on a woman's health. So I would say that get yourself, first of all, to be as healthy as you can. We know the way to do it with New Start and our good diet and all the things that we won't get into today. And then to be aware that pregnancy in and of itself can affect the rest of your life, not only by having a child and being responsible for that child, but in terms of your actual body cellular makeup and some of the ways that it changes.
Well, Dr. Henry, I want to follow up on a couple of things you mentioned there, but before that, let me just say to our listeners. Now, we have listeners listening on Facebook. We have listeners listening on SLC Adventist and SLC Church channel. If you're listening on SLC Adventist, I do understand that the subscribers mode chat only is on. You want to ask a question, etc. I'm going to suggest, well, whether you want to or not, but if you're listening on SLC Adventist, please subscribe. If you're listening on SLC Church channel, please subscribe. Stop what you're doing right now and hit that subscribe button, because this way you're notified of all of the programs we do and the various programs. But I do understand that for those of you who want to chat in the SLC Adventist, that there is some issue that you can only chat if you're subscribed. That is not my doing, but go ahead and subscribe. That's a good thing. And for those of you on SLC Church channel, do also subscribe. In fact, the benefit of listening on SLC Church channel, as you invite a friend who didn't get to hear it, all of the programs are on SLC Church channel. You can always go back, you find the whichever one you want to hear. So just thought I would mention that. Now, Doctor, let's get back to this matter of the impact on the woman's body. I'm kind of anxious to talk about this. Maybe I'm running ahead of myself, but if I were listening this afternoon, and as I said earlier, I'm out for 27 years now. We are not planning on having any more children. That would be quite interesting. We would have had to, if we needed more children, we'd have had to perhaps adopt or something to that effect, or pray for divine intervention. But let's say if I were listening from the perspective of wanting to have children, I would be very interested in understanding that, hey, it means that I need to prepare adequately for this. Yeah. That speaks to the issue of an area that a lot of people I know have conflicts over. This is the matter of planned pregnancy. When I was doing I had just come into ministry, and I was doing with a senior pastor. I was having a counseling session, premarital counseling session, and the issue of planned pregnancy came up. And what I heard suggests that there are individuals who believe that this planned pregnancy is not a good thing, and that we don't need to be worried about it. So here's my concern now. Given that there is such an impact, and pregnancy is a gift from God, it's a wonderful thing, but I want to hasten to ask, how does it impact you in terms of your age? A young person, sometimes we have people at 13, 14 getting pregnant. Sometimes we have people in their late 30s getting pregnant. Can you speak to that issue? We're going to zero in on the younger one, but talk to the issue of age and pregnancy for a moment.
Yeah, so there's certain changes that happen in your body with pregnancy, like we've established. Both, let's say, what we want to call the extremes of age. So let's say being pregnant in your teens. So just because the cells have kind of, your body has shown that it's ready on a scientific level for pregnancy, and women begin to go through menstruation. So let's say teens, and then the other quote unquote extreme of age. So women who are a little bit older and who become pregnant, both of those groups are at higher risk for a lot of the complications of pregnancy and a lot of the long-term effects. In terms of if you are listening and in either of these categories, I cannot help but advocate for planned pregnancy because when you are, let's say, teens, like we want to talk about, a lot of the times, people think, another is not good, they have this kind of community dynamic. You have a baby shower, all of your friends are there, and it's exciting to be together, and new life is exciting. However, when that dust settles, when it is past, the maternity photo shoots and all the other exciting things that we like, pregnancy is a very, very real and very, very serious lifelong commitment. So every pregnancy, whether or not it is carried to term, will affect you for the rest of your life, physically, on a cellular level, on a biologic level, and also mentally and emotionally on a psychosocial level. So for early teens, pregnancy is something if you are thinking already like, oh, I maybe one day would want to be a mother, or maybe one day I'm thinking about this, or I'm hearing my friends talk about this, start to ask questions now so that you can be armed with information. I think that teenage years, there's a lot of changes and a lot of exciting things that are happening in your body, and it may be hard for you to understand at every turn, but becoming pregnant in that time really affects you for the rest of your life. And the way that pregnancy is set up, it requires a lot of support on every aspect and every turn of your life, and it carries a lot of risk, so that this is not a decision that should be taken lightly, is I think the take-home point for that.
I think I just got muted there. Sorry about that. You mentioned a lot of things that we need to have a part two. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this up front, because there's so many things you have already mentioned. I have to choose which one I want to respond to. But you have mentioned, I believe I counted about 5 times this afternoon, that pregnancy will have an effect on you for life. Can we explore that a little bit more? You just said, even if you do not have a full-term pregnancy, there are lifelong implications to getting pregnant. Can you expand on that a little more?
Yeah. So in terms of lifelong implications for pregnancy, we can think about it in kind of 2 big categories. So one, the psychosocial effects of pregnancy and the circumstances that are around the pregnancy. And then 2, on a biological level. So on a biological level, we won't, kind of go into every single disease or the way that every single cell changes. But when your body expands, or when your body changes the capacity, and when certain cells begin to circulate in your body, the complications from pregnancy and the things that can go wrong, sometimes they can go wrong very early in the pregnancy. It's not only at full term that women can get a lot of diseases like diabetes specifically, and another big one and a problem for us in the Caribbean is pregnancy-induced hypertension. So that's, about 4 years worth of studying maybe by itself. But it's a whole family of kind of diseases that can be brought on just by being pregnant. So these are women who can be perfectly healthy, but pregnancy itself puts you at very, very high risk for developing these. And just from those 2 big examples, the diabetes and pregnancy-induced hypertension, those have been shown in the data to affect women for the rest of their life. Even after, or even if, let's say, at the time, they don't have the worst adverse outcomes, which is things like strokes and heart attacks, kidney failure, liver failure, those things, they're at increased risk for still having diabetes after pregnancy, or for having hypertension after pregnancy, and kind of having to deal with these conditions for the rest of their life. So that can happen to you just from being pregnant.
So then, when I see so many teenagers, getting pregnant. It's interesting. It's quite a strain on their bodies, and if they're not developed physically sufficiently, that is, there's a risk that they've been exposed to. So when we tell people the whole matter of taking your time and be careful, it is for good reasons.
Yeah.
You know, because as a pastor, perhaps I used to approach this from the perspective, well, you know, having sex outside of marriage is a sin, so don't do that. But now you're saying that apart from that reason, that from the health perspective, one needs to look at that. And I think that needs to be reemphasized.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Every time, I say every woman that you know, every time someone who has had a baby and went through that process and has recovered in terms of health, it is honestly a miracle. I've seen some horribly devastating things happen to women, perfectly healthy women, prior to pregnancy. So even in the state of being utterly prepared, and there's probably someone who is listening who could probably relate to that, say that, no, I did everything for my pregnancy and I, got myself in the best state of health, and they probably could have still had very, very heartbreaking outcomes and then effects on the rest of their life. So yeah, it is definitely, even though, it's a miracle and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, it's not something to be taken lightly. Yeah.
Now, one of our viewers wants you to elaborate a little bit on something you mentioned earlier. Elaborate on what you mean by a little older. Maybe that's in reference to me, because I was saying that, for very young or very old. So let's talk about the ideal time in response to this, and maybe you can expand on it. If technically, I want to think, a woman can get pregnant from the time she starts menstruating, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, but now some ladies, I don't know if it's diet related, and that's a question for you. How the diet impacts the stage at which you begin to menstruate. But some ladies, when I was a child, I didn't know a lot of these things. In those days, parents didn't have open conversations with their children. I remember I had a neighbor, and I remember my niece having an incident. I believe she was menstruating for the first time, and so we took her to this neighbor because my mother wasn't at home, and I heard the lady saying, "Oh, she's seen her flowers," So that's the kind of language they used to use in those days. But I'm curious to know, when is the ideal age, based on your knowledge of the body being able to handle pregnancy?
Yeah. Well, in terms of a lot of the risks and in terms of being prepared, there's no one ideal age to say, okay, everyone at age 25 or 20 or 30 or 31 should be pregnant. I don't have that exact number as an answer, but in terms of the data and in terms of the science, when we begin to see that you're a little more increased risk, it's when you're closer to the beginning of your menstruation, so teenage pregnancy, and then when you are closer to menopause. So a woman, from the time she begins to menstruate until the time that she has stopped menstruating for a year, because that's what menopause is. When when you have not had your period for a year, that's menopause. So anything in between there, you can be pregnant. When we say extremes of age, this is also something that's kind of being debated, but I don't want anybody to think that this number that I'm going to say, okay, this is my biological clock, and after this point, I cannot be pregnant. But after you are 40 years old, kind of the chance of spontaneous pregnancy or becoming pregnant without the assistance of different reproductive technologies, it goes down a lot, and a lot of risk goes up. But even as young as 35, there's a lot of risk that changes and can kind of increase in small increments from the time you're over 35 and you are pregnant. So pregnancy can still happen when you're 35, when you're 40, when you're 42, 43, 44, if you have not hit menopause, you can still become pregnant. But when you become closer to the extremes or closer to the time when you're approaching menopause or when you've just begun to menstruate, so teenage pregnancy, those are the kind of the two extremes where the risk is the highest. And in the middle is where we have data that shows that your body's a little bit more prepared. So when you've made it out of your teens and your kind of menstrual cycle has stopped or kind of settled a little more into the pattern. And then when you are a little further away from menopause, so that you still have your ovaries, which are the other organs that are involved in pregnancy, kind of still functioning at their optimum capacity.
I remember perhaps about a year ago, maybe, I can't remember the date, but one of the programs I had in Let's Talk sometime last year, we were discussing reproductive technologies, and I had a reproductive someone who has a clinic, Dr. Brown. I think he is in Miami or somewhere in that region. I don't remember the details now, but he was sharing Brown's reproductive something. It's a shame that I don't remember, but he was sharing that once you hit 38, you mentioned 40, the complications, the issues in terms of wanting to get pregnant naturally. So here's my question to you. I didn't plan to ask this question. I didn't know it was going to come up, but there are lots of women who are career oriented. They nowadays say, I want to make sure that I finish my career. I'm going to get this out of the way, and they do their undergraduates, they do their graduate studies, they go to postgraduate, and they're focusing, or some of them go into the job markets, and they're focusing on advancing themselves there, and they're saying, let marriage wait a little bit. And then they are 35, 38, they're getting married. If I hear you correctly, you're saying that if you plan to have a child, that perhaps will come with some degree of challenge at that particular age.
Yeah, one of the things that a woman can consider, firstly, in a woman pursuing advancement in her career, etc., or just having the freedom to kind of time pregnancy is one of the privilege of modern medicine, I think. So I think that if that is your plan, that is honestly, it's a fine plan. However, you just have to be a little more aware in terms of what you're getting yourself into. I think is what should be the take home. If you are thinking spontaneous pregnancy, the chances, you do have to be aware that it may become more difficult for you to conceive if you wait until, like you were mentioning, ages like 38 and 40, but it happens all the time, and people still become spontaneously pregnant. It's just that when you come to your doctor and you kind of talk about, hey, I would like to be pregnant. Let's say you're 40 years old and you come to your doctor and you say, I would like to become pregnant. They will kind of counsel you and let you know that at that point, there's some increased risk that go along with it. And I don't think, if you said you've already mentioned assistive reproductive technology on a past session, so we don't have to go into that. But there are ways that women who are younger and who are saying that I want to time my pregnancy a little different, there are things that they can do to kind of avoid some of these risks and to kind of be aware and have things like early detection of some of the issues and be followed kind of closely by a lot of birth providers to avoid the risk. So I think that some of the things that we've learned in recent years has really equipped us to be able to handle pregnancy even at these extremes. So you don't have to be dissuaded from being pregnant. Like go ahead and get your 7 degrees. That's wonderful. But and just know that God has given us a lot of information that still helps us to achieve this. Yeah.
Wonderful, certainly. I'm going to ask you now on the matter of well, you are a physician. You deal with the medical side of things. Mm-hmm. I suppose the psychological side of things, I don't know to what extent you as a physician deal with that, but as a Christian, the Bible tells us that pregnancy should operate within a certain context. I want to be careful how I say this because, We live in an age where there is free choice and those kinds of things. But from a Seventh-day Adventist perspective, we teach ideally that, you know, you're going to have a child. It is a blessing to have the child in an environment where there is mother and father, so that because the pregnancy itself, as you're saying, there are lots of issues, and then there is the care of the child after birth. My question is, as a physician dealing with cases on a daily basis, is an individual, I'm not speaking from the biblical perspective now, let's state that as a fact biblically, but I want to see how the biblical thing correlates with the physical, the physiological dimension, so to speak. So as a physician, as you view these cases that come before you day by day, is it an advantage in terms of how your patients cope when they're married, when they have a supportive spouse, or does it really not matter?
So that's a good question. And I think I want to first caveat to say that we are referring to healthy marriages.
Yes.
Because there's
certainly.
Healthy marriages where people are supported, where they're heard, where space is held for them and their needs, and they're respected as a whole individual. Let's go with that, because sometimes, you know, it is worse to have someone who is not supporting you and who is actively endangering you, as opposed to raising or going through pregnancy by yourself. That is a very sad and heartbreaking reality. But I just, you know, want anyone listening to not think that, oh, you know, Dr. Henry said that I have to have a husband, or I have to have the father of this baby in the house. No, listen, there's some people that are worse, and they're more of a danger, you know, during pregnancy. And so any woman should be encouraged, if you're in a dangerous situation, do not stay solely for the fact of having a person there. Okay, so that being said, yes, there's a huge impact, and I think it just goes to testify on how God has made us. We are creatures who are meant to exist in community, and I think that everything about our bodies and our science and our health, pregnancy included, kind of testifies to that. So some of the psychosocial effects of pregnancy, not only being with the new responsibilities and having to deal with the changes within your body, but being prepared for kind of hormonal changes and being at high risk for certain behavioral conditions like postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. These are all things that data has been shown that you can deal with better with adequate support. So if that support is ideally the other person with whom you've entered into this experience, you know, I think that is what God intended, like we mentioned. And we do show that women who are pregnant and are supported by partners who are carrying them and who are involved and who are safe and who will help them to reach their health goals, it has been shown that it leads to better pregnancy outcomes. But the reality is that sometimes women are in dangerous situations, and pregnancy can even escalate those dangers. Things like domestic violence and abuse, those actually increase during pregnancy. And so if you are in a situation like that, definitely leave, and know that the safest thing that you can do for the pregnancy is to be safe yourself, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense indeed. You know, we as from the counseling perspective would tell people that you want to make sure that you are well protected. Now, the issues here relating to one's ability to be able to manage from the psychosocial perspective, being able to manage strengthens the biblical counsel that marriage, you know, childbirth should best occur in the context of the home environment. But I do want to, because I do want to go back a little bit to the whole issue of complications that can result. And, I want young people who are listening. I don't know where you are, but certainly where I am, teenage pregnancy is, I mean, we have knowledge of a lot of things these days. When the HIV pandemic issue started, I thought maybe this would cause people to act more responsibly. But the fact that in spite of that, we're still seeing so many teenage pregnancies is an indication that some people are not heeding the counsel. And then there is an abundance of contraceptive devices, etc. And we still have so many teenage pregnancies. I am asking you as a physician who deal with the body, with the trauma and the whole issue of pregnancy, what would you say to young people who seem to be ignoring the advice of waiting until they're married? And I suppose maybe a lot of people who get pregnant did not intend to get pregnant. Yeah. I don't know if the body, how do I say this? I don't know if, okay, when a person realizes that they're pregnant and they didn't plan for it, does that impact the development stage in any way? The trauma of realizing, oh boy, look at what a terrible thing I've done. Does that really impact the...
So, I mean, in some ways, yes, but overall, no. It is okay if any woman who's listening can think back to when they became pregnant, and if they think, oh no, at first I didn't want to be pregnant, has my baby been affected? No, you are fine. Especially early pregnancy, the body is honestly so resilient and so prepared that it really withstands a lot. It really can withstand a lot in the beginning. However, I think that someone who is listening, and you mentioned it a little bit in terms of not heeding the counsel, I think especially us as the church, it has to do with the quality of the counsel sometimes. Sometimes we do people a disservice when they just don't know, and they kind of move through these teenage years in a state of ignorance, and that kind of leads to some of these complications, like you were saying, rampant teenage pregnancy. I know this is not a talk on sex and sexual health, but our avoidance of those topics kind of goes hand in hand with what we see in terms of teenage pregnancy, in my experience. So people who are more informed about sexual changes in your, let's say, puberty and your teenage years and adolescence, people who are more informed and who have more safe spaces available to them to discuss and to question and to get help in these areas, we have data that shows that those people can make better decisions in terms of when they're planning and when they're going through their lives. So I think that it is important for us to stop and think, how can I, like all of us listening, like how can I be available to, how can I kind of make these safe spaces a reality so that they can avoid? Because honestly, at the end of the day, teenage pregnancy is something that we should work to avoid. It's not something that is ideal on a health level, physically for the body of the woman. And then on a social level, there's so much of your life decisions that now become tailored specifically to pregnancy and to this child. And then I know we're not going to get into other complications and things like abortion, etc. But all of these things, people have so many questions and go through so many things, and miscarriages and the whole kind of world of the other side of pregnancy, that I think our teens can be spared from this if we make safe spaces that they can be more informed and they can ask more questions and they can kind of navigate that time in their life in a different way that helps them to avoid pregnancy.
Well, the abortion discussion is for next year, but I do want to talk to the issue of miscarriage, and because this question just popped in, so let me pair it with what I was going to ask you. My question was going to be about the impact of miscarriage on the body, but somebody is also asking, and so because we don't have a lot of time left, maybe I can just ask both together. What are some of the reasons why a person loses a child, especially around 4 months or so? That was the question from the viewer.
Yeah. I have to choose my words carefully, because miscarriage and loss is such an individual and such a vulnerable experience. I don't want to make light of it or to dismiss anyone's experience who's listening and what they've been through. In terms of the science, and when I'm talking to a woman who's kind of trying to deal with loss, the number one reason and the number one thing that has been associated with miscarriage is genetic abnormality. So let's say the actual cells that came together to make the fetus that was there had some type of a cellular issue. And usually when you have a miscarriage, let's say around, like 3 months or so, so first trimester losses, the biggest thing is kind of the genetics. And there's honestly not a thing in terms of that a woman can do. Some people think, oh, like I was very active, or I ate this or I drank that. And that's not really been shown. A lot of the times those first trimester losses are based on the cellular integrity and the pregnancy just not having essentially the correct makeup and missing certain genes, or just missing certain aspects of the development in the beginning. And so that part is usually completely random. And when I say random, it's heartbreaking, but there's a lot of women who will never kind of know why they had these early losses. When you move on a little into the second trimester, there's a lot of reasons, like pre-existing health conditions that make you at increased risk for loss, different environmental exposures that make you at increased risk. Like if you deal with a lot of heavy chemicals and in a lot of like high pollution areas, we see an increased risk of losses. And then there's different anatomic things. There's women who have different issues in terms of their actual organs. And so your cervix, that's the end of your uterus. Like if you think of your uterus, like think of it like a balloon, and that part at the end that you're not closed. So think of that part at the end, that's the cervix, and the rest of the balloon is the uterus. So there's a lot of problems sometimes with the integrity of the cervix that can cause it to open up early, or can cause women to break their water really early. And those can end up in a lot of losses. And sometimes the majority of women will never have the exact answer, especially in completely healthy women. And it's kind of an individualized thing that they go through. They can get different types of tests and look for different diseases, and kind of do some things in future pregnancies to prevent that from happening again. But yeah, the reality of sin and the reality of the fallen world is that a lot of the times we don't know. Yeah.
That is so very true. Now, when there's a miscarriage, is there a timeline before a woman tries? Is there a recommended timeline before a woman tries to get pregnant again?
So no, there's not a recommended time in terms of what your body is able to do. If a woman has experienced a miscarriage, we usually tell them you should be warned that you can become pregnant again even before you're ready. So in someone who is experiencing that type of loss, the biggest thing in terms of recommendations would be when emotionally you are ready, because your body cellularly, the next set of follicles in the ovary, those organs we were mentioning before, the next cycle will come around after you've miscarried, and you can get pregnant again even as early as the next period. There's no data that shows that there will be like a lag in your fertility. But when a woman has gone through that, obviously, as we can imagine, the mental strain of that could put you in a place that you're not ready to be pregnant again. And so that's something that they can kind of think about within themselves. Yeah.
Is there a difference between, medically, between a miscarriage and a self, okay, between a miscarriage and self-induced abortion? So in other words, I guess if the pregnancy ends before the full term, it's a miscarriage technically, but it can be naturally, as you mentioned. You mentioned several things that could create the miscarriage, but an individual could also drink. When as a child, I used to hear about a certain bush, I wouldn't call the name now, that the person can use, and it would help them to lose the baby, etc. So is there a difference in terms of impact on the body between self-induced and the natural miscarriage?
Well, the warning with the self-induced and the things, the bush tea that people have drank, is that a lot of these things are very dangerous. A lot of these things are not proven, and you can have complications in terms of what we call retained pregnancy tissue and hemorrhage and bleeding. And so I would say that to anyone who is listening and is suddenly thinking like, oh, I was actually thinking about going to see this person about this tea, please do not do that. Please talk to somebody first. In terms of medical difference, so when I say miscarriage, I'm referring to a spontaneous loss kind of before 12 weeks of pregnancy. When you kind of move on in terms of the terminology that you will hear from your doctor or from, if you look things up on the internet, they will talk about second trimester losses. And then you talk about preterm birth, and then they get into full term losses and what we see as called fetal demise. So different terms kind of just refer to different parts and different points in the pregnancy when the loss would have occurred. And if you're talking about the beginning, with so spontaneous, losing a pregnancy just in the first trimester, just a few weeks in, there's not a difference on the body between that and like a safely induced abortion, so to speak. But the difference comes when people induce abortions by ways that aren't safe. So, yeah.
Okay, now our time is just about expired. We haven't spoken about ectopic pregnancies. We haven't spoken about so many other things. It's interesting. There is so much to talk about. We haven't spoken about the whole matter of twins or that kind of thing. So that means that we need to have you back again for another discussion. But it was a real joy speaking with you this afternoon. I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and for enlightening me for sure on some of the issues relating to especially the area of that strain on the body, the challenge of pregnancy, the need to be properly prepared for it. And may I say the warning to young people who are having at-risk behavior, thinking perhaps that they're on top of business, they would not get pregnant. So I want to thank you for sharing all of those with us. I'm going to give you a few seconds to just share your closing thoughts. If somebody is listening, what do you really want them to take away before we wrap up now?
Well, I just first we want to circle back to that disclaimer in the beginning, where we sometimes really equate pregnancy and womanhood. And a woman is so much more than a pregnant body and so much more than a uterus and your ability to have a child. God, created a woman special and specific and different. So I just will always say that at every chance that I have, being a woman and being pregnant does not define you. Like those things are not, they're not equivalent. And the next thing that I'd like to think for anyone who is thinking about pregnancy, it is a joyous and a beautiful thing. And if there's a pregnant woman in your life, hug her, support her, text her and ask her how she's doing. But also give her the freedom to be this resilient and wonderful. It's not a disability, even though all of these complications are real. Pregnant women are doing so many things and they're fully capable of functioning and they can make decisions. And, don't dismiss a woman just because she's pregnant. Always advocate for yourself as a pregnant woman. Pay attention to your body and just make sure you're plugged into good community and you're sharing in a safe space. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We look forward to part 2, whenever that will be. And thanks to all of our viewers. We want to let you know that Let's Talk continues next Sabbath afternoon. Every Sabbath afternoon at 3 p.m. we're here And I'll tell you that we have a special Christmas program. This year, Christmas is on a Sabbath, and we're going to be talking about children and sugar. And the sugar and its impact on our children. So that's special. You need to join us for that one. May God bless you. Thank you all for your questions, for your comments, and we look forward to seeing you next week at 3 p.m. again. God bless.